Good evening to everyone. I welcome you to our web discussion tonight, organized by the Association for Social Reform, OPEK Cyprus, as well as with the Cyprus Academic Dialogue, CAD, in collaboration with the newspaper Politis. The discussion tonight is titled The Ukrainian War and Days of Uncertainty in Europe, Quo vadis Cyprus. Of course, the question is closely related to how we see developments in Europe in the last 6 days, when we see the war coming back to Europe again after many, many decades. Tonight, we are hosting a discussion among two academic persons, Mr. Yucel Vural, PhD in political science, founding member of the Cyprus Academic Dialogue, and Alexis Alecou, PhD in political science and history, member of the board of the Association for Social Reform, OPEK. This is a unique opportunity for the two organizations to discuss openly about contemporary challenges we are facing, the two communities of Cyprus are facing. I'm Politis. I'm the Vice President of OPEK and coordinating the EU-funded project in relation with the future of Europe. And this discussion fits exactly in the hardcore of what we are discussing openly among citizens. Let me give the first the floor for welcoming remarks to Mr. Nicos Peristianis, co-president of CAD, and Theano, Kalavana, Secretary General of OPEK. Mr. Peristianis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kyriakou. Good evening to everyone. I welcome you on behalf of CAT. CAT stands for Cyprus Academic Dialogue. This is a bicommunal organization that was established more than 10 years ago with the aim of bringing together thinking people across the divide from both communities plus others who live in Cyprus to think about our common problems, primarily the Cyprus problem, but of course any other issues that concern all of us, such as tonight. Tonight we think it's one of those rare occasions on which we think of what is happening to the outside world and how it may affect us, of course, here in Cyprus. CAT has been very active in the past years, organizing various events, including conferences, seminars, work with municipalities all over Cyprus, work on Famagusta, and so on. We welcome this opportunity of collaborating with OPEK tonight. And the person representing CAT tonight is Yucel Vural. Yucel is one of the founding members of CAT. He's one of the first ones who started it many years ago. Up to recently, up to Christmas, he has been the co-president in the last few years, along with myself. But he has now passed the mantle to another Turkish Cypriot. He still remains active. And tonight we will hear him talk about the Turkish Cypriot community and what they think about developments in the Ukraine. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. And again, thank you, OPEK, for co-organizing this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Peristianis. This is a unique opportunity we have to discuss, to organize together this event, and we are very happy to do so with the Cyprus Academic Dialogue. We share for many, many years common aims to bring the societies in both communities together and discuss the challenges we face and how to unblock the situation in Cyprus. Maybe the Ukrainian crisis will trigger more the interest of more politicians to deal with the stalemate in Cyprus. And that's why we bring academia together to discuss the situation created in Europe in the last days. Theano Kalavana will say a few things about OPEK. Theano, the floor is yours.
I would like to welcome you all and thank you so much for accepting our invitation for this event tonight. As you all know, or you are familiar, or you heard, OPEK started its journey in 1997, of course, before Cyprus was in the EU. It wasn't a member state, and then and we were aiming three things: transparency, more democracy, and social justice. And even that we enter the EU, we are continuing to promoting the same values. And of course, as an association, we are both focusing on the social and the political aspect, and we are strongly believe in a bi-communal, bi-zonal solution of the Cyprus problem. And as to the Ukrainian war, we did generate an announcement as to that a few days ago. And I just want to say a few words about our announcement, Kyriakos, and then I'll give the stage to our guests. So OPEK, of course, strongly condemned the invasion of Russia and the act of violence and the violation of the international law in Ukraine. And of course, it rings a bell for all of us because now the whole Europe is facing one of its most serious crises. Maybe since some people, they say, since 1991 when the communist model collapsed, but others, they say since the Second World War. So we have a crisis very near us that sees us to think of how we can remain in unity to face this crisis. So for us, what we came up in our announcement is that three things that Europe needs and the European members need to seek unity in order to prevent the expansion of this conflict because it's very near us for all of us. We also urge European member states to progress very rapidly as to their diplomacy, foreign affairs, of course, but also as to the sense of security and stability in the European Union. And one of the third points that we indicated in our announcement was about the action plan that the EU members need to put as a political process and decisions that will secure the values of the EU, but also to sustain the economic development of European Union. And of course, European Union has a crucial role to play in this. And in an institutional level, so I hope, and we do see actions from EU member states, and I hope that this will continue in order to secure our safety in the EU continent. That's all from me, Kyriakos. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Theano. Me and Soula Hadjikyriakou will coordinate the discussion. We first give the floor to Yucel Vural to deliver his initial speech, and then to Alexis, Alecou, and we'll have the chance later to come out with questions and further discuss on the hot topics we will listen to. Yucel Vural, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for, first of all, organizing this kind of event. And personally, I am happy to be here to speak about this tension between Russia and the West through Ukraine. Actually, I am implying that the war is not between Russia and Ukraine. The West has already taken a side although not militarily, but through implementing specific sanctions against Russia, the West is there. So first of all, I would like to state this reality. When I look at this tension, I identify some immediate consequences which are observable. And I also identify some middle and long-term results. I will talk about these too. And at the end, I will try to explain how this tension can affect Cyprus, the Cyprus problem, and in general, the two communities. If I start with the immediate consequences of the conflict, I would like to say that the first one and the most important one is the fact that Russian political leadership has lost its international credibility because, if you follow the developments, we know that Russia first announced that there was a military exercise in the area close to Ukraine, and the military would turn back to their bases. But later on, we realized that invasion started. Secondly, military operation, as they called, Russians called, was against Ukrainian leadership to protect people in Donbas region. But now we know that this war is against Ukraine, and the main aim is to destroy Ukrainian state. And finally, another factor which which created this understanding that Russian leadership has lost international credibility is the reference to nuclear weapons by the Russian leaderships. Secondly, I also observed that Russian invasion increased and intensified solidarity within the West. There is now an orchestrated reaction to Russia. Thirdly, the West at this stage is not willing to be a side of the conflict through sending military troops to Ukrainian land. But this does not mean that the West, I mean NATO and the European Union, the West is ready to increase sanctions, and also it can use some other military instruments against Russia, except sending military troops to Ukrainian land. Fourthly, the Russian reference to nuclear weapons has several aims, several objectives. First of all, Russia aimed at creating pressure on Ukrainian political leadership to give up resistance. Secondly, the second aim is to prevent the West from taking an active part in the war, saying that if you involve in more military actions, then I am ready to use nuclear weapons. And third, Russia aimed at creating division and panic in the West, both within the Western governments and the Western public. In general, the aim of Russia, by referring to nuclear weapons, is to stop the Western support to Ukraine. Yes, if I come to the short-term or immediate consequences of this conflict, I also find out that Turkey is trying to follow a policy of neutrality. This is important because when we come to discuss the possible effects of this tension, this position of Turkey should be taken into consideration to understand what can happen. Let me move to middle and long-term results of the war in Ukraine. First of all, if Ukraine maintains its resistance against Russia, NATO will be forced to have a more active military role in this conflict. How can this happen? I think that a part of Ukrainian territory, airspace of a part of Ukrainian territory can be protected by NATO in the middle and long term if Ukrainians manage to resist against invasion. Secondly, regardless of the consequences of this war in Ukraine, Ukraine army can be defeated or they can manage to control a part of Ukrainian territory. Regardless of these developments, the role and position of Russia will be questioned not only by the Western countries, but also by the world public opinion. There are two reasons of this. Russia, as a member of the United Nations Security Council, violated blatantly the territorial integrity of a member state and invaded a neighboring country. Secondly, the threat to use nuclear weapons cannot be tolerated by anyone. So these two developments will encourage international community to question the position of the Russian state in the international system. For example, it will be very difficult for Russia after this event to easily maintain its permanent membership in the Security Council. Yes, the third long-term effect is about Turkey. I consider that Turkey will be forced by the Western powers, by NATO, to end its neutrality policy. This is important because Cyprus is implementing EU sanctions against Russia, but Turkey has not started implementing these sanctions. Third long-term effect, I consider that the war between Russia and the West through Ukraine can turn into a civilian resistance if Russia defeats Ukrainian army. So the conflict will continue, even if under the conditions where there is no Ukrainian organized military unit to fight against Russians. If Ukrainian army continues to defend a part of Ukraine, it will be very difficult for NATO and the European Union and the member states to avoid direct military involvement in the conflict. Because the Western public opinion, as far as I understood, will apply strong pressures on the governments of the member states to encourage them to take more active roles. I don't know if I can continue or I can wait and listen to the second presentation. Then we talk about how this conflict affects Cyprus problem. What do you suggest?
my suggestion is to split it into two. Listen to Alexis, Alecou now, and then continue with the second round, commenting each other, let's say, and add some of the questions from Soula Hadjikyriakou and others in the panel, as well as from the audience. Alexis, Alecou, we're listening to your initial speech.
Yes, thank you, Kyriakos. I think Yucel said it all about Ukraine, and I need to repeat that war is always an affectionate event. There can be no progressive stance from the Ukrainian crisis that doesn't condemn the Russian invasion, of course, and the escalation of the conflict in Ukraine has implications that surpass Eastern Europe. Just as its causes, so will its consequences will be global. Western sanctions will hurt the Russian economy, will hurt the Russian people, but it's doubtful that they will influence what will happen to Ukraine. I'm afraid that the effects on these sanctions will not be that big. At the same time, there is a significant bill that people of Europe will have to pay. This war has nothing to do, in my opinion, with values, with morality, with ideology. Ideology, it is an important element in political conflicts, of course, but it does not cause the conflicts, and it cannot explain the conflicts. Even at the ideological peak of the Cold War during the 50s, the substance was geopolitical and not ideological. The form, of course, was ideological, but not the substance. Yes, Putin is an authoritarian leader, but this is irrelevant to what's going on in Ukraine now. And yes, the Ukrainian regime is associated with Nazis and has been persecuting the ethnic Russian Ukrainians. But again, this is not why the Russian invasion takes place. This is and has always been about the geopolitical balance of power. After this war and after the consequences of this war, a new geopolitical balance of power will eventually be established. And the question, of course, remains what that will cost to the whole world, and in particular to Europe. Some of Europe's biggest industrial groups have warned of further price rises in the face of energy cost volatility following Russia's invasion. And as we here in Cyprus know very well, there are no wars for peace, there are no democratic invasions, and the war in Ukraine reminds us that ongoing conflicts always have unexpected developments. And therefore, since I'm already holding the floor, let me proceed to some comments regarding Cyprus and the Cyprus problem. Therefore, we must take the Ukrainian crisis as a bell ringing, as an example, and we must solve the ongoing Cyprus problem before we face another unexpected escalation that nobody wants. The continuing deadlock in Cyprus has multiple effects in our everyday life. It is just that we got used to it. Well, we, the majority at least, got used to this normality, and we cannot realize the effects, the dangers, and at the same time, the potentials we could have under a united, free of hostility, free of foreign interventions island. The solution of the Cyprus problem after more than half a century will give a united common homeland for all Cypriots by utilizing all its people, its wealth producing resources, and its geographical position. Specific sectors of the economy, such as tourism, shipping, retail, services, even higher education, will be significantly strengthened. Investments from abroad in a peaceful and reunited Cyprus will significantly boost the country's GDP. Companies and investment funds that were reluctant to invest in Cyprus due to political uncertainty will now be willing to do so. A united and peaceful Cyprus can serve with legal and accounting services a large number of Turkish companies. This is not just a theory. These are numbers that can be proven. These Turkish companies can be interested in moving their headquarters in European Union, in a European Cyprus. Greater economic growth will be accompanied by the rapid creation of new jobs. And the most important benefit, of course, is the unseen one, which is the bicommunal relations. We can see many similarities between the Ukrainian crisis between Ukraine and Russia, and the ongoing deadlock in Cyprus. We don't think that the similarities are there, to extract specific conclusions, but to get some feedback on what to avoid. The deadlock is increasing the distance between the two communities. We've seen the two communities coming closer after the checkpoints opened almost 20 years ago. And now we are witnessing the gradual neighboring normality. We do meet each other. Bicommunal groups exist, and we have the pleasure to discuss with one. But we are not actually developing together. We don't create together. I'm not saying something new. Under these circumstances, that's normal. One could argue that under these circumstances, we are doing our best. I'm afraid that as time passes by, the deep states in both communities, using their ideological mechanisms, that is religion, education, stereotypes, narratives, will work harder and harder to keep the two communities apart. And the main argument towards the solution of the Cyprus problem used to be justice, peace, reunification. We have nothing to share between the two communities. All these are nice. But in my humble opinion, we need to face reality with more rational arguments. The Ukrainian crisis is there to remind us that morality and other values are not so strong arguments to avoid the crisis. So we need to use more rational arguments. We must develop a new series of arguments based on people's needs, based on everyday lives, based on the dangers of the deadlock and the prospects of the solution. Ukraine is a very good example of the dangers Cyprus is facing, both for Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots, from different perspectives. Let's be honest, civil society cannot really affect in a direct way. It's the leadership who needs to have the will, the political will, to move things forward. And unfortunately, we don't have such leaderships in either side. Civil society can only push towards that direction, but in order to do so and to be efficient and effective, it needs to draw a new strategy with creative and easy to understand arguments. That's all for now, just as a first statement, and we can continue later during the discussion.
Thank you very much, Alexis. Most probably, Mr. Vural will reflect also on the situation in Cyprus in a while. Soula Hadjikyriakou, most probably you would also like to raise some questions based on what you heard from both our speakers.
Yes, well, I don't expect anything to happen towards a solution for Cyprus before the elections. So I think it's useless to talk about finding a breakthroughs for dialogue, because no such thing will happen as long as this leadership is still in power. Now, about Ukraine. Ukraine managed in a few days to change the whole world, I think. Things that could happen in years, they happened in a few days. First of all, we see the European Union having solidarity, a unique states. They agreed on measures and on sanctions against Russia very effectively. We see even giving arms to Ukraine, EU member, which is a first thing. And also we see Germany getting armed. As you know, but now suddenly decided to increase her army equipment and spend about her military billions of Now, Cyprus, we don't expect tomorrow the European Union to do the same with us. I mean, we don't expect the European Union to fight on sanctions against Turkey as it did with Ukraine. I think European Union realizes that they can anything.
I'm afraid we have a bad connection with Soula Hadjikyriakou, but nevertheless,
the European Union has 2004 and 2017 find a solution. We used to do anything, so not bearers anymore. They have also changed our.
Thank you, Soula. You have a very bad connection, internet connection, and you cannot listen to me well. If you like check your connection, your connectivity.
Well, connection. You also cannot follow.
Yes, something is going wrong with your connection, as I understand. Mr. Vural, will you reflect on Cyprus implication in a while? So, stay a little bit, wait a little bit to give the chance to Mr. Vural to reflect on the Cyprus issue. Do you see any short-term implications in the relationship, in the prospects of thinking wise and clearer of what to do next in Cyprus, or it's just business as usual?
Actually, it is very difficult to predict what can happen regarding this conflict, what can emerge regarding the Cyprus problem under the effects of Ukrainian crisis, but I can try to develop some ideas based on two different scenarios. If we skip economic effects of Ukrainian war, because there will be, I think, I am not expert, but both sides in Cyprus and Turkey, Greece, receive tourists from Ukraine and Russia. And under the current circumstances, it will be very difficult to continue this activity. But as I stated, I am not expert on this. But there are some political consequences. My first scenario is that despite the pressure from the West, from the European Union, from NATO, from the Americans, Turkey can maintain its neutrality policy. This is not the first preference of Turkish leadership, as far as I understood, but there is such a possibility. In this case, as a member of the United Nations Security Council, Russia will be supportive, or will not be supportive of the existing parameters relating to the solution of the Cyprus problem, because while Turkey maintains its neutrality, as you know, Greek Cypriot-led Republic of Cyprus is implementing European sanctions. So there will be a kind of important difference regarding the reactions to Russia from Cyprus and from Turkey. But as I said before, this is a little possibility. The most powerful possibility is that Turkey joins the West against Russia and starts implementing sanctions. Now, you know, Turkish airspace is open to Russia. It's not clear what the Turkish leadership can do. If we look at the public opinion, there is huge support to Ukraine, and except the governmental officials, other actors are condemning very strongly the Russian action in Ukraine. Although the government in Turkey condemned Russian invasion, first describing it as a military operation, but later on moving towards Europe by changing this description, saying that it is invasion. Although there is a condemnation, there is a dominant perspective in the Turkish government that Turkey should continue its ties both with Ukraine and Russia. In other words, they argue that Ukraine and Russia are equally important for Turkey. And this implies a neutrality policy by the Turkish government. But if Turkey follows the Europeans, the EU, and supports NATO actions against Russia, then I expect that international community will encourage Turkey to change its stance in the intercommunal negotiations. So we can expect a positive development in the sense that intercommunal negotiations can start again, but the main focus will continue to be the confidence building measures, because under such circumstances, the main focus of the EU and Americans will be Ukraine. So they cannot start another radical process in Cyprus. This is my initial understanding when I look at the conflict in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Perhaps we can suggest some conflict measures to Ukraine and Russia. The breakthrough in the discussions. We are experts now after so many.
If I correctly understood, you are saying that although we are not successful in implementing confidence building measures, we can encourage Russia and Ukraine to follow. I think Russia will not speak this language, as the current evidences show. They will not work in the near future. Yeah.
I have identified two areas for further discussion that I need your input on that, both Alexis and Yucel. and maybe Mr. Peristianis wants to contribute as well. The one question is related to the foreign policy of the Greek Cypriots, the Cyprus government led by Nicos Anastasiadis, and the privileges given to Russians oligarch for some time, and the strange relationship we have with the Russians for some time, for many, many decades now, either because we are dependent from their stance in the Security Council, or because of this, let's say, not so clear relationship, I mean, economically, with certain circles in Kremlin. One question is related to that. Greek Cypriots will continue the same stance since they are aligned with the European policy for sanctioning Russia, and these sanctions are not just for a short term. It seems to be a long way ahead. Secondly, is related to Turkey and, of course, the existing leadership of the Turkish Cypriots, which is connected to Turkish policies. If they move on and take a clearer stance next to the side by side with the West, whether they will try to capitalize on that, because the role of Turkey will definitely increase the importance of Turkey for the West, for the European Union and the United States, and because they own a very, very specific part of strategic importance for them next to Russia. That's the question one for Alexis Alecou. The second is for Yucel Vural.
Kyriakou, first of all, I would like to applaud the optimism of Yucel that the stance of Turkey might influence the pressures that could be applied on Turkey to accept the return in the intercommunal negotiations based on where we left them back in Crown Montana. But I'm afraid I would have to agree with Soula that although she has a bad connection, we managed to hear her first statement that she said that we cannot expect some radical developments before 2023. And I fully agree with that, because unfortunately, the recent past should teach us that other interests are more important, especially in the Greek Cypriot community. Regarding your question, Kyriakos, about the stance of the Greek Cypriot community, which is in between the West or the EU and the Russian interests, especially of the current administration in the Greek Cypriot community, I would say that President Anastasiadis proved so far, unfortunately, proved that he can balance between the two positions. And the recent 2 days ago, the recent example is there to prove that, to underline that he chose to send a message to Russia that, I'm not so keen on participating in the sanctions procedure, but I have to do it. Of course, the Russian ambassador in Cyprus, with yesterday's statements, showed that he's frustrated with that. I'm afraid that the Greek Cypriot society, the Republic of Cyprus, has to take a clear stance. They have to be more clear. I'm not sure that the sanctions will last long. I wouldn't bet on that, Kyriakos. I think that this crisis developed so quickly And there is a possibility that it will blow off quickly again. I'm not sure that these sanctions will last for years, probably for some months.
Because it costs a lot.
It costs a lot on both sides.
It costs a lot,
on both sides, exactly.
Yeah, both sides, that's it.
Yes, exactly. So I don't think that this crisis will last long. Hopefully, nobody wants this crisis to last any longer. But the sanctions will also last less than we can predict. So since we have elections in 1 year in the Greek Cypriot community, and since I agree with Soula that this is the most important element regarding the Cyprus problem, the change of policy, the change of administration in the Greek Cypriot community regarding the Cyprus problem, the change of the position of the Cyprus problem regarding the change of the position of the Greek Cypriots regarding the Cyprus problem. So I think that the Ukrainian crisis and the consequences of this crisis will affect the Cyprus problem, but just in short term. Let's hope that Yucel is right, that pressure will be applied on the Turkish administration and on the Greek Cypriot administration as well.
If I may add a question to Yucel myself. Yucel has chosen maybe the more optimistic scenario, but what if Russia, being cornered right now by all the West, tries to use some leverage to push the Greek Cypriot side? For example, we already mentioned the fact that in the summer we expect tourism, but most importantly, we expect a renewal of the staying of UNFICYP in Cyprus. So what if Russia decides to use it as a threat against the Greek Cypriots and say, look, guys, I'm not going to vote in favor of renewal of the United Nations presence in Cyprus, of UNFICYP, because you are not supporting me, you are fighting me, you have just done what the West is doing. Why should I stand on an issue of principle or whatever we call it? This time, I will vote differently. What if they start pushing for that? And what, to make things worse, what if Erdogan decides that in this new configuration of powers, it pays him to align more closely with Russia and maybe imitate a little bit what Russia is doing, take this opportunity to be harsher in Cyprus, and push for something similar to what happened in the Ukraine. For example, since he hasn't been getting what he wanted up to now, since he hasn't managed to get the Turkish Cypriot side recognized, what if he decides to push more so that he weakens the Republic? And what if he pushes for more concessions from us? Otherwise, to use the threat of a similar second intervention. These are extreme possibilities, but are they completely out of the question? I'm afraid myself, I don't see why they should be excluded.
Mr. Yucel?
Yes. I recorded the questions. First of all, let me explain the source of my optimism. I agree with most of the arguments raised by Alexis. Russia, at least since 2013, 2014, is sending a message to Cyprus, especially to the Greek Cypriot-led Republic of Cyprus, that if American presence increases in Cyprus, Cyprus will lose stability. So Nicos' question is very important. Actually, I implied this. Russia can change its stance. And I think the West is ready to this change. If Russia uses its veto in the Security Council meeting and reject the extension of UNFICYP presence in Cyprus, I think this will be a good reason for the Western countries to start a process for Cyprus to become a member of NATO. Russia is also trying to speed up Turkey's departure from the West. There is such a tendency, but my optimism is that Russia will lose in Ukraine. So it will not be able to play with Cyprus or with Turkey to encourage Turkey's departure from the West. And if Turkey realizes that Russia is going to lose, then we will see that Erdogan will start implementing sanctions against Russia. It is true that Erdogan is an unpredictable leader. He can do anything at any time. So if he realizes that the West is powerful against Russia, and Russia will not find a way to maintain its threat against the West, he will change. Kyriakis also identified a point that Russian oligarchs now have some privileges provided by the government in Cyprus. I think for the West, it's enough for them to see that Cyprus implements sanctions. So that is a secondary issue. And I think that sanctions will also affect the Russian oligarchs' activities in Cyprus. But as announced by EU leaders, the results of these sanctions will be visible in the long run, not immediately. But we see some immediate results, but the main results, which will be very negative for Russian economy, will be long-term results. So I think I answered some of the questions at least. Thank you.
I was wondering while listening of.
May I say something, Kyriakos?
Yes,
talking about Russia in the Security Council. Remember that Lavrov that day referred to the Bank of Cyprus. Remember that the time, the message from him that he will no longer support our stand if we go along with the European Union and agree with the sanctions. I don't know, it was a message. Because I know Lavrov...
Osachi, the big ambassador. The big ambassador, yes.
Big ambassador, but...
No, talk about Lavrov.
We should in general include the possibility that Russia may want to divide the West. Yeah, so it will use some of the countries whose interests are more easily affected by Russia's stand to put pressure on the whole of the European Union, for example.
Mr. Peristianis, you are right that one of the intentions for a long time now was that Kremlin was trying to infiltrate it in European issues in many, many ways, and exploit the weakened parts of it. And they were able to do a lot of things. I'm not sure whether we are talking about a short-term crisis, a war which will de-escalate. That's one issue raised before while Alexis took the floor, because if it's something in the short term, definitely there is room for tactics between big and smaller parts, actors. What if it is a long-term shift, a tectonic shift for the European Union? And it seems to me that Europe now is thinking likewise, not in the short term. If we take into account that Germany, for example, has canceled one of the huge projects they have with Russia, I'm talking about the Nord Stream pipeline, and they are increasing rapidly their defense budgets. And we are talking about billions. And at the same time, what we see in the big picture, not just looking of what Cyprus might do or not, is that the West is developing a new doctrine for Europe. They are searching for stability, and they see that Putin's regime will be there in any case for 1 decade, 2 decades. I don't know how much they will stand on this situation. Something more is happening. This is what I'm asking, and maybe we have a reply from our keynote speakers. If it's something short term and it will de-escalate, things might come to normality, not the same way like in 2 years or 3 years ago. But what if it is something more radical happening now? And this will stay and become a serious crisis for a decade, for example. It's a matter of strategy and how we see the Cyprus issue or the participation into the European Union of Cyprus, the prospects of having a renewed effort to solve the problem in the context of the European unity, let's say, or even with the intervention of the United States, which show much interest very, very recently when they were engaged in the foreign policy of Eastern Mediterranean. As you know, they have canceled East Med pipeline, and they are trying to mediate between Israel and Turkey. Why I'm asking this? Because the new developments show that we might have deep changes in Europe, not just tactical ones. I don't know how you reflect on that.
If I reply shortly, I will say that there are some evidence in Turkey that Turkey will change its stance against the natural gas issue in Eastern Mediterranean and the Cyprus problem. But I personally do not expect any radical move by Turkey, any radical development in the short run, because Turkey wants to negotiate everything, not only Cyprus issue, but also Greek-Turkish relations, exclusive economic zone issue between Turkey and Greece, natural gas issue, Cyprus problem, the American support to the Kurdish armed groups in Syria. They want to discuss and negotiate in a package. So in the short run, it's not realistic to expect a radical change in this situation. And Turkish leadership, this is the Soula question I forget to answer. Turkish Cypriot leadership now follows Erdogan. So it's nonsense to try to analyze what they are saying, because they will change if Turkey change. Thank you.
Alexis, there is also a question in connection with what do we expect a real change of Turkish policy to take advantage of the situation in Ukraine in order to settle the issues in the Eastern Mediterranean with Cyprus and Greece? And what do you think?
To answer this question, we have to answer first, or to predict your initial question, whether this whole crisis will last longer or will close in a very short time. And I think that the keys of the solution of the Ukrainian crisis are in Western pockets. What I mean by this, I think that Russia wants a neutral Ukraine, a neutral neighbor. And I believe that this is the main demand of Russia now after the invasion. That is that the invasion is the pressure tool for Russia to achieve neutrality of Ukraine. If the West accepts the neutrality of Ukraine, then the crisis will finish, at least for now. We cannot predict any future escalations. So in that case, I don't think that the Cyprus problem will be influenced in a big way, in a huge way, from this crisis. But in the other hand, if the crisis in Ukraine continues, therefore the new doctrine you mentioned, Kyriakos, the new Western doctrine, I think will influence a lot the Cyprus problem on both sides, both Turkey and the Greek Cypriot community or the Republic of Cyprus, choosing a side, that is. And by choosing a side, I'm afraid that the Cyprus problem will become frozen problem until other issues will come on the surface. And the Cyprus problem will be a matter of negotiation between the West and the opposite of West. We cannot call it East. So I'm afraid that this is not for the interest of Cyprus, in any case, the continuance of the Ukrainian crisis. So the question is whether this will continue or not. And as I said before, the solution, the keys for the solution of the Ukrainian crisis is on Western pockets, if they accept the neutrality of Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Peristianis, if I may raise a question in relation with what you said, that Russia might blackmail Cyprus on the issue of ANFICYP. That's something we have to have in mind in the coming months, in connection also with the traditional foreign policy of Nicosia, I mean the government of Cyprus, that they were asking the engagement of all permanent members of the Security Council in the effort to solve the Cyprus problem. This, of course, was part of the rhetoric used before the Ukrainian war. I don't know if they can repeat it now by calling up to Kremlin, for example, to be more active in solving the Cyprus problem, and whether this would be accepted by the West in the situation we have now. There are a lot of complications and a lot of stereotypes used in our foreign policy, I'm talking about the government of Cyprus foreign policy, that might not be so useful, let's say, in the current situation, as long as we have this huge confrontation between Europe, United States, Europe, and Russia. I don't know if Mr. Peristianis agrees with that, Yucel and Alexis, if they want to comment on that.
Well, actually, many things may be changing soon, because if this conflict drags on, if it comes to a happy end very soon, as Alecou said, well and fine. Yeah, maybe things will return to normality, but not so easy. If there is continued resistance in the Ukraine, even if their army is defeated, if there is unofficial resistance for the years to come, then everything will be very volatile. And Turkey may get its big opportunity to try its luck by changing its policies slightly. For example, lately, it has experimented with some advancing in the green zone. What if it decides now that the West cannot deal with a second problem? Yeah, suppose that a second issue flares up in Cyprus. Is the West going to turn its attention to us? I think we are a very small problem for the West to focus on us. I'm not saying this is a very likely possibility, but it's there. That Turkey may want to take advantage of this confusion now and these new realities for Russia at least, and that Russia will now have to take a different stand than in the past. It may try to see whether changing its policy and being more forceful during this period of uncertainty until things settle down is in its favor. Again, we cannot simplify. We cannot say that, yes, Turkey will definitely try that, because Turkey itself is in a difficult position. It is trying to decide what its future path will be. Will it try to stay with the West? Will it decide to make a new alliance with Russia? In many ways, it depends what the outcome of this conflict will be, the present conflict that we are discussing. If Russia is a winner, Turkey may want to be nearer the winner, to create a new alignment with a different force than the West. If Russia loses out, maybe it will be easier for Turkey to go back to the West and renegotiate its position within the West. So there are many open issues at the moment. It's very difficult to predict what will be happening in the future. Not so easy, but we may end up with some circumstances, some developments that we don't like. So I would come back to what Alexis said before. I think it's a good opportunity for us and a good juncture in which to think about putting an end to our problem and perhaps forcing a solution by taking initiatives ourselves rather than waiting for the West again to take the initiative. It may be a good opportunity for us to come up with some initiatives of our own and suggest what perhaps should happen in Cyprus. For example, if we go back to Russia for a minute, there was an agreement on the ground that some kind of federation was going to develop in the Ukraine. Well, we've been discussing the same solution for some time now, and we are refusing to push it to its logical conclusion. So maybe that's the time. Now is a good time, or now maybe is an important juncture in which to consider our options and decide that waiting and stalling is not in our favor, not only for the Greek Cypriots, but for the Turkish Cypriots as well. We should come to a conclusion, and perhaps this is the juncture that we've been waiting for. Turn the negative developments into positive ones. Perhaps the coming elections on our side is a good opportunity to ask the politicians to take a stand and demand that some of them at least say clearly what they expect and what they want to happen in Cyprus.
Mr. Vural, do you think we have lessons?
Of course, in 2023,
we have lessons to take from the Ukrainian war and what happened just before that. Mr. Peristianis hinted that the Kiev government could have done more in order to meet the compromise with the Russian areas well before the escalation of the crisis in the form of federation.
The Minsk agreements, yeah.
The Minsk agreements. Do you think that we have lessons to take, or we have lessons to give based on our experiences in Cyprus?
I think everybody can take some lessons from this event. But I don't think that Ukrainians had a big chance to change the situation, because there were preparations by Russia long time ago. If you remember the American presence in Greece, increasing presence in Greece, I think the West predicted this kind of development, and I think it was very difficult to stop Russia through approaching diplomatically. But diplomatic action is always useful and preferable instead of leaving the negotiation table or putting some unacceptable ideas. It is necessary to really negotiate, be ready to understand the other side. This is the lesson to us, because we spend too much time to understand each other at official level. The two leaderships met to discuss the things, not only official leaders, but also the others. Now, when I look at the political parties which have always been supportive of federal solution, I see that they agree on one principle: bizonal, bicommunal, federal system. They didn't go beyond developing ideas on specific issues and exerting pressure on the official leaderships in both sides. So the lesson is you need to engage in negotiations creatively as official leaders and civil society and political parties by preparing the ground for a solution. This is, I think, the lesson we need to take.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Mr. Vural. We are very talking to conclude, Soula. Maybe this is the last question you want to raise or make some comments in order to give the chance to our keynote speakers for a concluding remark. Soula?
Well, we're talking about our elections.
We cannot hear you, Soula. Unfortunately, we don't have a good connection to follow and understand what Soula wants to do. Soula, we cannot hear you.
Yes, I have a problem today. I don't know what is the problem. I don't know what is the problem.
Let's try to summarize, if possible, to summarize our discussion today. One point is that many things are unclear and we are working, and the uncertainty is now the unknown factor of what we can design for our next steps. Secondly, as I understand, Mr. Vural, you said that we shall wait to check and see how Turkey will position herself in this crisis and then come out with a conclusion on how we move forward. Alexis says that we have to have in mind that we might have a de-escalation soon. This might not last too long. Let's check this, how it develops. There is a question whether the Treaty of Lausanne will expire next year. I don't think this is the case. One of our friends in the attendees raised this question. I don't think that this is a fact. Lausanne treaty is still in force. Let's have some, let's say, concluding remarks from both of you, starting from Alexis, then Mr. Vural, and we will conclude our discussion. Alexis?
Yes, a short...
Nicos Hadjikyriakou wants to put a question.
Okay. Nicos? I don't see any question from Nicos Hadjikyriakou.
He wanted to speak,
yes,
I think.
Yes, you're right. Let's give the chance to Nicos to speak. Nicos, can you listen to us? Nicos? Yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can hear me.
Very young.
Oh, very good. Okay. Hello, Yucel. How are you? I don't know if you remember me. I don't hear you. Okay, it's been a long time. Anyway, I would like to express my opinion on the Russian issue, on the Ukrainian issue. I think Russia has already lost. It has lost big time, really big time. It is in a vacuum now. It has been isolated internationally. There was a vote this afternoon at the European Parliament. 631 people voted against it. I was glad to see that my friend Yucel Vural voted against Russia. 13 people only, MPs, voted for Russia, and 26 abstained. One of them was Georgiou Ovagel. That is very sad, in my opinion. I think what we are looking at now is as you said it, all of you, a reshuffle of the cards. I think new possibilities may arise for the Cyprus issue. After this totally nonsensical, barbaric invasion of the Russian army against a sovereign, independent state. I don't know why Alexis called it regime. That's very heavy to call it a regime. And do you have, Alexis, any hard evidence that they associated themselves with Nazis? I only see Russian propaganda here. And anyway, many countries that they were and that have entertained notions that Putin's Russia can be a trustworthy partner, I think are having second thoughts right now. Nobody trusts this Russia now, let alone Turkey. I think Turkey will move to the warm, safe, and sure embrace of the West. And the West will definitely want calm waters in Eastern Mediterranean. This gives me hope that the West might give it a real go now for solution. I don't expect Russia to push for a solution to the Cyprus problem. Russia, for the last decades, kept the problem open because it suited her. It wanted to price away Turkey from the West. Now, it's been a long time that I am very pessimistic. Now I see perhaps some light at the end of the tunnels. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicos, for your intervention. Thank you very much. This will give us a chance to have a concluding remarks from both of you. Alexis?
Yes, just a short comment of something that Nicos said. Of course, there are many evidences about the connection with Nazis. That's not an excuse, of course, for Russia to invade, as I mentioned before, but there are a lot of evidences regarding that. And also the word regime, I think there is a democratic deficit in Ukraine. we cannot really support the Ukrainian people by avoiding some facts. As a conclusion, I would like to say that we should hope for de-escalation, a short end of this crisis, not just for Europe or the whole world, but for the benefit of Cyprus as well. Because if we face the dilemma to choose sides, and of course we will choose a specific side as Cyprus, I'm afraid that if Turkey chooses the other side, the Cyprus problem will enter into a freeze mode, and we wouldn't like that. I totally agree with Yucel with something he mentioned before, that in that case, Cyprus problem will be probably a part of a whole package. And these international conflicts or even domestic conflicts cannot be solved partially. And in this case, I'm afraid that the status quo will continue, and we all know that it's not something stable. Status quo always changes, and not for the benefit of Turkish Cypriots or Greek Cypriots.
Thank you very much, Alexis. Mr. Vural?
Okay, a little contribution. The war in Ukraine encouraged the Europeans to refocus on the common security and foreign policy. And I think this is important for Cyprus too. Cyprus is not an actor which can affect the others, but through the European Union, through taking part in the common policies of the European Union, we can benefit. And I see a positive development here. Now the European centers realize that they have to consider this very seriously, developing a common security and foreign policy, and maybe a military power to protect the external boundaries of the European Union. So I think we need to concentrate on this. In the short term, we cannot expect any important development, but at civil society level, we are right. Dialogue between the two communities at all levels is necessary. And I congratulate again OPEK to organize this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vural. That was very, very welcome for us to listen to your and listen to your thoughts and work together with the Cyprus Academic Dialogue. Mr. Peristianis, last word from you.
Well, the most optimistic development for us would be for the European Union to move towards a federal direction itself. So we should be working for that, to encourage. We are players, we are a small player, but we've got a voice. We can try and influence decisions in that direction, because really the problems of Cyprus will become much easier if Europe itself is much more united in a federal direction and much more powerful.
Let's see whether we will coincide with the other key players in the Cyprus issue, and we might have a new momentum in 2023 after elections, having in mind that all this situation created in Ukraine gives us lessons to think forward. And let's check whether we would be able to have a more peaceful and stable continent after the end of this terrible war. Thank you very much for everyone for their participation.
Thank you.
Good evening. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Good night.